The foreign ministers of the Quad grouping, the US, India, Japan, and Australia, are set to meet in Tokyo today.
It will be the first Quad foreign ministerial talks in September and comes amid concerns over China's growing assertiveness in the region.
Topping the agenda, challenges in the East China Sea and the growing militarization of the South China Sea and North Korea. Reports say the four will reiterate their stance opposing any attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by force or coercion in a free and open Indo Pacific.
The Quad gathering comes a day after high-level discussions in Tokyo between the US and Japanese defense and foreign ministers. They describe China as the greatest strategic challenge in the Indo Pacific region and beyond. Tokyo also hosted a trilateral meeting with ministers from the US and South Korea discussing a range of regional security issues.
For more, we are joined by Grant Newsham. He's a senior research fellow at Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Thank you very much for joining us, Grant. Let's just start with what's been agreed between U.S. and Japan over the weekend, the upgrade in military cooperation between the two sides. Just how significant is this deal, and how will it benefit both countries?
Well, it's a good first step. And the big thing that was agreed to was the Americans said that they will turn their headquarters in Japan for U.S. forces into an operational headquarters. Currently, it's just an administrative outfit that apologizes to the Japanese when the Americans do something wrong. But if you turn it into a real warfighting headquarters, and have that go along with what the Japanese have just started to do, which is get their own joint operation headquarters, it offers some real possibilities in the future for the Americans and the Japanese to actually have a useful defense relationship in the sense that it can do real-world short-notice operations. So it's, as I said, it's a first step. Many questions remain to be answered about what sort of authority and resources the new headquarters will have. But that will come with time if we've got enough of it. But they also agreed to do a number of other things, many of which they're already doing at this meeting. And it was all in all a good reaffirmation of the level of cooperation and increasing cooperation the Japanese and the Americans have.
Grant, in their joint statement, Tokyo signed off on what the US calls extended deterrence, which I understand includes nuclear weapons as well. This was an issue that was once off limits for Japan. So tell us about this shift and what it means alongside the expanded capabilities you were just talking about, command and control for the commander of U.S. forces, Japan, and also increase Japanese production of U.S. missiles.
Well, with extended deterrence, and what they're talking about here is the U.S. promising to use its own nuclear weapons to defend Japan. The Japanese have always been very concerned about this, despite their supposed allergy to nuclear weapons. They've always been glad to have the Americans with nuclear weapons available to protect them. And the Americans gave them some more reassurances at this meeting, but I'm not sure that's going to be enough. The Japanese just might have a feeling that a promise the Americans will do something is no guarantee they'll do anything. But at the same time, as I noted, the Japanese have been pushing for this for a long time. And without it, if the Japanese have some doubts about American commitment to use nuclear weapons, well, I think things could get very interesting. The Japanese have the capabilities to make their own. And as you noted, in these meetings, there were some agreements made that the Japanese are going to help the Americans produce some weapons. The Americans need the help, and particularly things like Patriot missiles, AMRAAM missiles for their fighters. And there's a real contribution the Japanese can make, and they're also willing to export these things if they need to the Americans, and then have the Americans take things out of their stocks to provide to others who say are at war. This is already being done with Patriot missiles to some extent. But all in all, we're seeing a deepening of the relationship and in having turned into sort of a practical relationship with concrete things that it produces that we haven't seen for a long time. It's been in the works for about 5 years or so, but it just seems to go faster and faster. But the Japanese know they have a problem with China and North Korea and Russia, and they are worried. And that's why you see them doing things which, according to the Constitution, they shouldn't be doing. But that's been reinterpreted out of its original meaning probably 6 decades ago. But it shows Japan will always do what it needs to do to defend itself. And it also knows that without the Americans, its odds are not very good. And the Americans, by the same token, they need the Japanese. Things have reached that point in the region.
Grant, and the move is likely to stoke the ire of Beijing. Just how big a threat or disruption would this upgrade be for China's calculation in the Indo Pacific? And how would Beijing respond diplomatically or militarily?
Well, China will complain. They always do when anyone tries to defend themselves. China's military buildup has been going nonstop for the last 30 years, regardless of any temporary alleged improvements in our relationship with China. So China's military buildup is going to keep going. Their objective is clear: to dominate the region and to pay the Japanese back and to drive the Americans back to Hawaii or Los Angeles. So that isn't going to change. And diplomatically, well, they can talk, but it's not going to amount to much. What you're seeing is the free nations, the two principal ones in the region, really taking some steps to defend themselves and others. And the Chinese don't like it. They never do whenever anyone tries to, as they say, stand up. And generally, you know that you're doing something right, depending on how much Beijing complains about it.
Grant, the Quad FMM starting today for 2 days, they're expected to reaffirm that shared commitment to a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific to counter China. We were just talking about that. But we also know that the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met his counterpart S. Jayashankar on Sunday amid tensions over New Delhi's support for Russia. How open will India be at this particular Quad meeting to have the Ukraine war on the agenda? It's not been willing to do so before, beyond its humanitarian consequences?
Oh, I think the Indians will be cooperative. They have their own interests and they look after their national interests. And that's a change, really. They're not tied into sort of ideologues or agenda-driven foreign policies like they used to. But they are cooperative where they can be and in a lot of places. So when it comes to the Quad, India's relationship, of course, with Russia is a sort of something that causes some friction. But at the same time, there's a lot of other things that India does do to cooperate with Japan, Australia, and the United States that are very important. And they all share a common problem, which, as you noted, is an aggressive People's Republic of China. Each country has its problems with China, and their strategic interests certainly align in terms of dealing with it. Of course, the Ukraine war and, as noted, India's relationship with Russia does get a lot of people sort of worked up, but I think one has to put that into its proper context, and there's a lot of good that the Quad can do. I think they intend to do it.
All right, Grant, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts. Grant Newsham is Senior Research Fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies.